Hey there, I'm Natalie Fox and I'm a registered dietitian specializing in ADHD and binge eating, and in this video we are going to be talking about the research behind some of the most commonly recommended herbal and natural treatments for ADHD so that you know which ones are actually effective and which ones are not worth the hype. And you definitely want to stick around because there'll be a couple of more illicit substances that I will talk about at the end of this video. Now without further ado, let's jump right in and put those supplements up on the board. First up we have ginseng. Now the theory behind why this might be helpful for ADHD is that there is some evidence out there that ginseng may help reduce the production of certain adrenal hormones that have been linked to impulsivity and hyperactivity. Now, there has been some research out there that shows that ginseng may be beneficial for ADHD. However, the research that's out there is pretty low quality and therefore it's not that definitive. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is a meta-analysis of the 6 studies that have been done on ADHD and ginseng supplementation. In this meta-analysis, they did a risk of bias assessment where they look at certain aspects of the methodology and how results are reported to figure out whether or not it's likely that this is a biased study. Based on the analysis done in this paper, 3 of the 6 studies were concerning for bias. Additionally, 4 of those studies were industry funded and another one did disclose that there were conflicts of interest. However, they don't disclose what those conflicts were. Half of the studies had no control group, and of those, one of them wasn't looking at ginseng supplementation alone, it was looking at ginseng plus Ginkgo Biloba. Of the studies with a control group, one of them was a crossover trial that had a sample size of 2. It's funny because they list the age range of the participants, but if it's just a sample size of 2, then you know that one participant was 14 and one of them was 17. The second study that had a control group was looking at kids with subclinical ADHD. So that means kids that didn't actually meet the threshold for an ADHD diagnosis. And the authors note in this paper that the reason why they were looking at this particular population is they were trying to look for therapies that would help prevent the progression into full-blown ADHD. And the result of this study is that ginseng supplementation appeared to be beneficial for inattention, but not impulsivity and hyperactivity. The other study with the control group was a randomized control trial, and in that study, both the placebo and the treatment group saw a significant improvement in symptoms, but there was no real statistically significant difference between placebo and treatment. They did see a small statistically significant difference in hyperactivity scores, which is the opposite of the previous study. So overall, I don't really find this data that compelling because even though these studies are industry funded and not well controlled, which really should be producing the most optimistic results possible, we're not really seeing a very large benefit from taking ginseng, and the benefits are not consistent from study to study. So I'd probably skip this one. Next up, we have Ginkgo Biloba. And the reason why this one might work for ADHD is that Ginkgo Biloba has been shown to be beneficial for other neurological conditions. And there is some research done in rats that shows that it may affect dopamine production and metabolism. Outside of the study I talked about in the last section where Ginkgo was provided in conjunction with ginseng, there are 3 studies out there looking at Ginkgo Biloba supplementation for ADHD symptoms. This study looked at the effects of Ginkgo Biloba supplementation compared to Ritalin, and absolutely no surprises, showed that Ritalin was more effective. But yeah, we knew Ritalin was going to be more effective. The second study was an open label trial with no control group looking at the benefits of supplementation, and it found benefits in inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity. And it's worth noting that the authors of this paper disclosed several conflicts of interest. And here is another randomized control trial that looked at ginkgo supplementation versus placebo in conjunction with Ritalin therapy. And the results of the study were that Ginkgo Biloba had larger improvements in inattention scores compared to placebo, but that there were improvements in all ADHD scores in both groups. So I would say that overall, there's just not enough research yet to know whether or not this is going to be effective. There is a very small number of studies that have been done, and the sample sizes of these studies are also very small. However, I think one of the strengths of this body of research compared to the studies done on ginseng is the fact that the results were consistent, whereas the studies done on ginseng were not that consistent in terms of what benefit you might see. So it's possible it could be effective, but I wouldn't put my money in it just yet. Supplement number 3 is French Maritime pine bark, also known as however you pronounce that. Pycnogenol, Pycnogenol. We'll just call it FMPB. Now, the theory behind why FMPB might be beneficial for ADHD symptoms is because of its antioxidant properties, and oxidative stress has been implicated as one of the drivers of ADHD symptoms. Of the 4 randomized control trials that I could find on this supplement, 3 of them were industry funded, and the 4th one appears to have some ties to industry, although it appears to be mainly publicly funded. Let's take these bad boys in chronological order. First study looking into this supplement was done in 2002, where they took 24 adults and gave them either FMPB, a placebo, or Ritalin. And the result of that study was that there was absolutely no difference between the groups, which is really weird because there should be a difference between the Ritalin group and the placebo group. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I think it's safe to say that we could probably discount this one. Moving along to 2006, we have this study where they gave kids either the FMPB or a placebo for 1 month, and then they followed that up with a 1-month washout period, and they retested parameters again. In order to assess the effects in children, they administered 2 different ADHD scales to their teachers and to their parents. For one of the scales administered to teachers only, it showed that when children were supplementing FMPB, they had improvements in both inattention and hyperactivity compared to placebo, and that those benefits went away when the supplement was withdrawn and they went through that 1-month washout period, which is a pretty promising result. However, the other assessment tool provided to teachers saw no benefit of FMPB supplementation, and neither scale administered to parents showed any effect either. So maybe a little bit promising, but certainly not definitive. Next up, we have this crossover trial from 2021 where children were given either the FMPB or a supplement for 4 weeks, and then they did a 2-week washout period, and then they switched. So if they started with the FMPB, they finished with the placebo and vice versa. As with the last study, the only benefits that were seen compared to placebo were from the rating scales that were completed by teachers. There was no benefit to FMPB supplementation reported from the parents. However, the way the paper is reporting results is that there was a significant benefit from FMPB supplementation in all domains and from all groups doing the assessments. And the reason they're able to say this is that there was a significant improvement in symptoms from baseline to the end. But there was also a significant improvement in symptoms in the placebo group. And when you compare the placebo to the FMPB supplementation group, there was no difference in benefit. Which leads you to conclude that most of the benefits of FMPB that was seen in this study are just the placebo effect. And last up, we have this paper from 2022 where children were given either the FMPB supplement, placebo, or Ritalin. As with the other studies, the benefits of FMPB were more pronounced in the teacher rating scales than they were in the parent rating scales. There did appear to be an improvement in the parent rating scales when FMPB was provided over a longer period of time. However, since the sample size is so small, I would really like to see this trend continue in order to make sure that it actually is a trend and not just some artifact because of the small sample size. Overall, the study found that there was a benefit in FMPB supplementation, but unsurprisingly, the Ritalin group did the best. So overall, is there evidence that French Maritime pine bark can be beneficial for ADHD? Yes. Is that evidence at all definitive or strong enough to justify a widespread recommendation? No, especially since there wasn't consistency between teacher and parent scoring in any of the studies. But I would really love to see more research done on this one particularly because it could be promising. Next up, we have lion's mane. And the reason why this one is supposed to work for ADHD is, I don't know, mushrooms are kind of hot right now. Apparently, there's some research out there that shows that lion's mane might be helpful for people with cognitive impairments and dementia. This one really feels like bandwagon hopping to me because there's absolutely zero research done that shows that lion's mane does anything for ADHD symptoms or even anything that's tangentially associated with ADHD, such as dopamine production. The closest thing I could find was a randomized control trial that looked at the benefits of lion's mane for cognitive function in healthy adults, and that study found pretty much nothing. So yeah, absolutely no evidence for this one. I honestly think that people are throwing this out there to justify selling very expensive products that have very tiny amount of mushrooms in them because somewhere people got the message that mushrooms are going to be the cure to everything. Next up on our list, we have ashwagandha. The justification for this one is that ashwagandha may be anti-inflammatory and have some benefits when it comes to stress relief, generally speaking. Most of the evidence for the efficacy of ashwagandha for ADHD comes from research looking at the efficacy of Ayurvedic treatments for ADHD symptom management. The issue with this is that none of these studies are looking at ashwagandha alone. They're looking at ashwagandha in conjunction with several other herbs that are used in Ayurvedic medicine. So even if this research shows that there is a benefit, we don't know for sure if it's ashwagandha driving that benefit or if it's one of the other 15 things that were included in the herb blends that were used in this research. The other issue is that the quality of this body of research as a whole is really, really poor. This meta-analysis done in 2023 shows that there may be some benefit to Ayurvedic approaches for ADHD. However, just about every single study is really concerning for bias. In fact, a huge part of this paper was dedicated to detailing the issues and methodology from the studies that were being reviewed. The only study that I could find that looked at the benefits of ashwagandha supplementation as a monotherapy for ADHD was this one, which was looking at the potential benefits of using ashwagandha for anxiety relief for children with ADHD. And this study did find indeed that ashwagandha was helpful at reducing anxiety in this population. However, they did note that the ashwagandha had absolutely no impact on ADHD scores. So overall, I would say there's really not any research supporting the idea that ashwagandha specifically is helpful for ADHD symptoms. However, it may be helpful for any anxiety symptoms that you might be encountering, but that is a benefit of ashwagandha generally speaking. Moving right along, we have St. John's wort. The first one is a placebo-controlled trial done in 2 teenagers. Wait a second, that sounds really familiar. Didn't we look at another study that was done in 2 teenagers? Turns out this study in St. John's wort was done by the same author who did this study in Gensing. I bet you anything it's the same 2 teenagers, but the age ranges changes, so I guess somebody had a birthday. Anyway, the study showed that the St. John's wort supplementation in these 2 kiddos did show benefits in certain ADHD scores and not in others. And then there was this larger randomized control trial that showed absolutely no benefit in any of the domains that they were testing. And this study was funded by multiple pharmaceutical companies, so if there was any way to massage the data to show a benefit, they would have done that. So overall, I would say there's really not much data to support this one. You could probably skip it. Now, before we move on to the fun stuff, I just want to say that this is just herbal and natural supplements. I also did a video reviewing the different vitamin, mineral, and amino acid supplements that are commonly recommended. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. Okie dokie smoky, let's talk about the devil's lettuce. Now, most of the research that's been done on cannabis and ADHD so far has been broad strokes population stuff, such as are people with ADHD more likely to use cannabis? There's also some research out there looking at how cannabis use affects brain activity in people with ADHD, but there's not a ton of research on how cannabis may affect ADHD symptoms. But keep in mind that all the studies I'm about to review have some significant limitations, which makes sense considering that cannabis is still illegal in most places. So it makes researching it and conducting randomized controlled trials really challenging. This study looked at markers of executive function in people with and without ADHD based on their cannabis use. And what they found is that in people with ADHD, those that started using cannabis before the age of 16 are more likely to have worse markers of executive function than the folks with ADHD who started using cannabis after the age of 16. But there's no difference in executive function markers between people with ADHD who started using cannabis after the age of 16 and those who never used cannabis at all. Additionally, this study looked at brain imaging on those same populations and found that there's not really any difference in brain activity between people with ADHD who smoke cannabis and those with ADHD who don't. So based on these studies, you can conclude that cannabis probably doesn't have any effect, positive or negative, on ADHD symptoms. It is possible that using cannabis at a younger age may affect executive function, but it also may be possible that people who have worse executive function might be more likely to start using cannabis earlier. So you really can't make a causal relationship there. Now there's a couple more interesting studies that may highlight some potential benefits to cannabis use for ADHD. This study here looking at people who are using medical cannabis shows that people who are taking a higher dose of medical cannabis are more likely to have a lower dose of stimulant medication. And this survey of college students with ADHD who use cannabis note that one of the reasons why college students report taking cannabis is to help them manage some of the side effects of stimulant medications, namely anxiety and irritability. So while cannabis may not directly impact your ADHD symptoms, it may interplay with your stimulant therapy and could potentially have other benefits in terms of overall quality of life. But as I mentioned before, there are a lot of limitations to this research, so take it with a grain of salt. And last but not least, we have microdosing psychedelics. Now, there is almost no research on this for very obvious reasons, but there was one study, so let's talk about it. What researchers did was send out a survey to people who were intending to start trying microdosing for the management of their ADHD symptoms. And they collected data from these participants before they started the microdosing therapy, at 2 weeks, and again at 4 weeks after initiating microdosing therapy. And what they found was that there was a significant stepwise improvement in ADHD symptoms and overall well-being at each time point. But there are some massive issues and limitations with this study. First, the dropout rate was massive. 233 people completed the baseline survey, and at 2 weeks, 167 of them had dropped out. By week 4, only 47 people remained in the study. And researchers note that of those 47, 9 of them were non-responders. Now, because of the nature of the study, there's no information about why people dropped out of the study. It could be just for general ADHD reasons, so people forgot to resubmit surveys, or it could be because they didn't have a good time on microdosing. Either they had an adverse reaction, or it wasn't effective, or maybe they had issues continually having access to these psychedelics to continue that therapy. However, with a dropout rate that high, it is incredibly possible that the only people that completed the study were the people that were getting a benefit from it, which can absolutely skew data. Second, there was no standardization in the therapy that people took. Most of them were taking psilocybin or magic mushrooms, but people also took other things. And there was no standardization in the dosages either. And the one thing I want to point out is that based on the dosage journals that participants turned in, the average dose of psilocybin or magic mushrooms that people reported taking was 722 milligrams, which is not a microdose. And that was the average. So there's a question as to whether or not people in the study were even doing microdosing at all. And third, there was no randomization or placebo group. So overall, could microdosing help your ADHD symptoms? Maybe, but this study certainly doesn't give evidence strong enough to justify taking the legal risk and giving it a try. So there you have it, all of the herbal supplements that are most commonly recommended. Let me know in the comment section below if there are any that I missed or if there's any ADHD content or supplements that you'd like me to review in the future. See you in the next video.